Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm the executive pastor here at Reunion, and I'm honored to be the one facilitating this discussion with some amazing people doing amazing things. At Reunion, we talk a lot about loving our city and our neighbors, and what does that actually look like? And that's a big reason why we started this rhythm of Fifth Sunday Serve. And so one of the ways we can love our community is by listening and understanding. And so before we start, I just want to let people know who are watching that we'll be hitting a wide range of themes and topics that are really complex. And so the goal of this discussion is that we hope it just sparks us to move and to engage more and to learn more. And so I'm going to start with Matt and Lauren from Pine Street Inn. And so if you could just share about who you are and your organization and how COVID-19 has affected your population, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us. So I'm Matt. My colleague Lauren's on the call as well. We are 2/3 of the staff that run the volunteer department at Pine Street Inn. So our central location is in the South End. And on a daily basis, we serve about 2,000 individuals through 4 main program ways. We have our street outreach team. We have emergency shelters. We have a job training program, and then we have permanent supportive housing. So our mission is to end homelessness. And during this pandemic, I think it's become more clear to our leadership team and our staff that finding housing is really the way to help people, especially in a time like this. So for the shelter, in our main shelter, there's about 300 beds for men, and then with a capacity overflow for about an extra 100. And then the women's inn has about 120 guest beds. So at the beginning of this, we had to figure out how we could social distance for a population that didn't have the luxury to do so. And so we've worked well with the city. We've worked well with Suffolk University that gave us their dorm. It's a 17-story dorm. We're working with the other shelters throughout the city. Boston University has given us housing for our staff so that they can social distance from their families. And so we've had to increase our capacity for that. We've added screens on the dinner line. We've spaced out dinner service so that there are less people in common areas. And it's stretched our staff thin because we've had to move to different locations in order to provide the same kind of services. We've increased, all the sanitation. So overall, it's costed, I think Lauren can correct me, but I think it's an extra $250,000 a week to run Pine Street Inn. We have 40 other properties where we have tenants, and they haven't had the kind of same issues that our shelters have had. We tested in early April and we've tested citywide 2,200 homeless people, and it's come back at a little over a 30% positive rate, but most have been asymptomatic. And then we separated the people who moved over to Suffolk University were the ones who tested negative, and it allowed them to distance socially and have a room. And then anyone who tested positive went over to different facilities, a convention center, or if it was severe, to the hospital. So moving forward, we still are trying to figure out what the plan is once Suffolk takes over their facility. We don't want to go back and have the density that we had in the shelter. That's just not going to help the population that we serve moving forward. So there are a lot of challenges ahead, but our leadership is really ingrained with the city. We had our 50th anniversary last year, which speaks volumes to what we do as an organization. And then Lauren can talk more about how we can get involved. We've had to put a pause on our volunteer activities. We have over 5,000 volunteers that come in annually in a lot of different capacities. And everyone's itching to get back, but we're taking a very cautious, conservative approach to how we reintegrate that. But we're working with different departments to figure out how we can have people get involved still.
Yeah, so we've actually, as a result of COVID, we had to suspend anyone that wasn't a Pine Street Inn employee from coming in. So that does affect our really robust volunteer program. As Matt said, yeah, on average, we have about 5,000 annually. So come March, this past March, when we had to kind of postpone the program. Folks that have been, dedicated and serving with us for, 30, 40 years plus, had to be told that they can't come in for their meal shift, their monthly meal shift. So that was definitely a really big change of pace for us. Currently, we have staff that have been redeployed to kind of fill that void from the volunteers, which has been really great. So a lot of us are working, the dinner line, helping out in the kitchen, helping out at Suffolk University. So that's been really fantastic. We're really hoping to, as Matt said, kind of get back into the swing of things. We definitely have to be really cautious about it. We're trying to explore a myriad of different options of, maybe we can't have folks on site, but are there other locations? Are there other needs with like our tenants that we can fulfill? So we're certainly in the process of exploring all that right now. But in terms of just getting involved with us at the moment, there are still a ton of needs that we do have. As Matt mentioned, the high cost of just running the shelter at the capacity that we're running it at right now has certainly been pretty hefty. We do have a COVID fund that folks can donate to, and I'm happy to send along, any information for that. As Matt mentioned, we also have we have quite a few folks in our housing, in our 30 or 40 housing locations, about 850 tenants. And while they are able to socially distance easier than folks that are staying at the shelter, that being said, if any of them do get sick, it would be really hard for them to go to the store to like pick up items, just have food for themselves. So we actually have a really fantastic Amazon wish list for our tenants, which has everything from, things like mac and cheese and complete easy meals to brain busters to like pairs of socks. So that's something, we are certainly really pushing still. We actually have converted one of our house basements into kind of like a pantry, which has been really great and a huge hit. We have like housing staff coming in and picking up like food items for tenants. So that's been really fantastic. And then just, we're still looking for PPE just like everyone else is. If anyone is, able to make like cloth masks or has a connection to any other PPE like hand sanitizer, surgical mask, gloves, still very much a need for us. We're collecting those constantly. So if folks wanted to get together and sew some masks and stuff like that, that would be fantastic. The other thing that we've been kind of playing around with is we have really wonderful food groups that actually provide meals on a monthly basis to a lot of our tenants in housing. And as they can't now go to the houses, they can't, socialize with the tenants, it's been a bit of a change for them. But we are asking if folks are interested in like getting a meal delivered to one of our houses, something like a pizza or any sort of, Chinese takeout, something that can be delivered via Grubhub or from the restaurant directly, maybe sending like well wishes or a card or something to the tenants as well with the meal. That would be really fantastic. So we're definitely still playing with some options, and there's definitely some things that are burgeoning right now that we would love to have folks participate and be a part of.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt and Lauren. Just like a quick side note for Pine Street, the church that I grew up in used to be at Pine Street originally, and now our offices is actually literally on Pine Street, where Pine Street Inn used to be on. So
nice.
That's really funny.
Connection that we have. I'm going to shift gears, but when you talked about meal delivery, actually, this kind of relates to Danielle, and so I want to introduce her, and maybe you can share about your organization. And how COVID-19 has affected your population.
Absolutely. It's really going to be interesting to hear about the overlap in terms of what we all do. So I'm with Community Cooks, and we've had a great relationship with Reunion Church for the last few years. And speaking a little bit to what Lauren was saying, our entire model revolves around volunteers. So we have a core of 1,000 volunteers under normal times who are commit to making a home-cooked meal once a month, and we deliver about 5,000 meals each month to 41 different partner agencies. So we work with homeless shelters and addiction recovery programs, after-school programs, we can backpack. It really, really runs the gamut. And we have this amazing engaged core of volunteers who, we have some folks who've been doing this for more than 10 years. We have quite a few, probably nearly 200 who've been doing it for more than 5 years. So it's a really regular way to lead volunteerism into your life. And then we feel like we want to be there for the partner programs as well as the diners who are eating our food, but to help the partner agencies stretch their budgets and have more time to focus on their core missions and a little bit less time worrying about food. So as you might imagine, as like COVID started to rear its head, it was really hard for us, but we made a decision in mid-March that we had to suspend all of our volunteer meals. There's also a lot of touch points that volunteers are making in terms of delivering to us and then someone else delivering. And luckily, as we were trying to figure out how do we do anything in this time, we started to partner with a local business, a local bakery cafe called Forge that wanted to work with us to try to get meals that we could deliver to folks, and they would be individually packaged, because normally our whole model is all about it's almost like a potluck, right? People are making giant trays of food, it's congregate dining, it's often being served at a support group or in some kind of communal setting that brings people together. And suddenly we were faced with a dilemma of like, people really wanted food prepared in commercial kitchens and food that could be individually packaged for maximum safety. So we made a mad dash and started trying to figure out what each of our programs was doing. Some closed their doors temporarily, some stopped accepting food of any kind, and then some were still giving out food outside or in some other capacity. So of our 41 partners, we've been serving about 11 of them since the beginning of the COVID crisis and providing around 350 to 400 meals a week by working with Forge. And then in the last maybe 5 or 6 weeks, we've also added another dimension, which is unusual for us, which is getting prepared meals delivered to individual households where someone in the house has had a positive COVID diagnosis. And so it's difficult for them to cook. So getting groceries, food that has to be prepared, is actually not entirely helpful. So we've been working with a healthcare provider as well as with the city of Somerville, getting referrals from nurses of folks like that, and working with the same bakery Forge and another catering company to try to get a week's worth of meals at a time to households. And we're serving folks, we're based in Somerville, but under normal times we also serve communities throughout Greater Boston. And I would say with the individual meals, we've been particularly in like Malden, Everett, Chelsea, some in Somerville, Medford. So I think now that we're sort of reaching another flux point where there's this sort of tiptoeing towards whatever reopening may mean, that we're taking a step back to try to think like, okay, we may not be able to deploy our volunteers the way we normally would for a while, safely for the volunteers, safely for the program. So how do we both make sure we understand what true gaps in need are, and that we're coordinating with all these other amazing food serving efforts that have been mobilized over the course of the past 2 months. So how we find that need, and then how do we continue to work with restaurants? If so, we have a model where normally we don't pay for food because our volunteers donate the food that they cook. So raising money to pay for the food in this new sort of reality. And just determining kind of who we are. I have to say, like, COVID has really touched at the core of who we are, because we do work in this very personal way and mobilize so many different volunteers. It's definitely time to get creative.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know a lot of our reunion, the volunteers at reunion who partner with you, we're like itching to try to get back, but we know it's not safe to do so. What would you tell them in terms of other ways that our community can, I know you just explained, you're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Maybe are there some tangible ways, or is it more just wait and see and just,
It's a great question. And it's so heartbreaking for us because we want nothing more than to mobilize people. But we also realize that we have so many volunteers that to mobilize any means sort of a lot of questions around safety. So for now, like I said, we're trying to figure out if there are ways that we can use volunteers in a hands-on fashion, as opposed to just saying, like, we definitely need money. It's our 30th anniversary this year. We were supposed to be having a big gala next week. That's not happening, which I know is true for a lot of organizations. So trying to make up some of that, and also the fact that we have this new cost for food that we weren't paying for before. So that's definitely a need. We're in communication, and I bet this is true for maybe even all of you, with other community partners all the time what their needs are. So sometimes, for example, we work with a school-based program that gives kids food to take home on the weekends and does community meals. And I know that they need volunteers. So I'd be happy to share some select volunteer opportunities that are with our partners, where they're actually using people on site. And one other area, and I have to, I could write something up for you, is that when we're reaching out to the families, the households that are being referred to us, sometimes there's a language barrier, and we have capacity for Spanish and we have capacity for Portuguese, but we have come across like Arabic speaking families or Mandarin Chinese speaking families. And so we could use some language capacity potentially for someone to help us with some outreach from us.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'm going to kind of shift gears now to Kevin. And Kevin, if you could kind of share about who you are in your organization and how have affected you and the people that you reach.
Yes, thank you for having me on. I'm elated to be part of a panel as knowledgeable and as committed to the community as this one. My name is Kevin Peterson. I'm the founder of an organization called New Democracy Coalition. We focus mainly around civic engagement in areas of civic literacy, civic policy, and electoral justice. And we've been doing this work in Boston, but particularly within communities of color, more specifically within the Black community in Boston for over 10 years. So the COVID-19 pandemic has struck my community in a devastating and disproportionate way. 28% of the population of Boston is African American or Black, I should say. 42% of the victims of COVID, either in terms of contracting the virus or dying in the wake of the virus, 42% have been Black. So there's a vast disproportionality in terms of how the community that I serve, that I work in, has been impacted. And I know so many people who work in the area of community development and civic engagement and advocacy of all kinds who've lost friends and loved ones to this virus. So there is a sense of despair that sort of hangs over the community that's palpable. My organization, again, which focuses around civic engagement, has partnered with Episcopal City Mission to convene conversations. So over the last month or so, we've had 2 town hall conversations with over 22 different leaders, Black leaders within the community. Not to address the immediate here and now, because there are a number of organizations and activists who are addressing the here and now in terms of providing meals, in terms of providing face masks, in terms of providing education opportunities for young people online. That's the here and now. We've decided to look at where the Black community is 6 months from now, or 12 months from now, or 18 months from now. How do we begin to look at constructing or reconstructing a vision of the community, so that in the wake of all the devastation, we find pathways towards healing and rejuvenation and building community again. So these leaders over the last month or so have come together and offered suggestions about how we might project a different vision for the community, for the Black community, in wake of the devastation. And there were just a couple of themes that rose to the top. There were so many things that came out, but one theme that rose to the top was that to go back to where the African community was, or the African American community, or the Black community was before the COVID-19 virus hit the community, is a non-starter. There were so many disparities that range from income inequality to housing segregation to the net worth issues in terms of the white-black vectors in the city were not, those things are undesirable. So if we could use this opportunity to look at how we began to address those long-term systemic issues that are impacting the community along the lines of race, then we should use this COVID-19 virus pandemic as a silver lining in the dark cloud. Another thing that arose from the leadership was that there needs to be a check of the Black community's internal institutions, its advocacy groups, its civil rights groups, even its churches, around how it can best serve the community moving forward. How does it become more intimately connected to the most vulnerable and the most needy in the city? It was clear as those leaders spoke that there is a disconnection that needs to be breached by leading institutions within the city. The third theme, which was high-minded and kind of abstract, is that there needs to be a plan regarding Black reconstruction in the city. And that's civic and political, economic, cultural, spiritual reconstruction in the city. I mean, in these communities where things are broken and where there is deep division internal to the community. So there needs to be, beyond asking for government help, and that was needed. That's a theme that rose, that we need to appeal to government, the public sector, to support rebuilding the community. But there also needs to be a real inward gaze in terms of how functional its own institutions are. So we will continue. We'll have one more town hall meeting in about 2 weeks. We are transcribing and pulling all this data, all this information together into a document to be shared among the hundreds of institutions within the Black community as a tool to do this inward evaluation and moving forward with a different vision for the future.
Thanks, Kevin. Obviously, in light of recent past current events, including the murder of George Floyd, many Christians are asking the question, like, what should we be doing? What should the church be doing? I know that's a really big question to ask, but maybe you can offer some of your thoughts and encouragement of what you think Christians and churches should be doing in response to what has gone on in past events.
Yeah. Well, as a Christian, as a deeply committed Christian myself, I think the answer is as ancient as it is contemporary. We need to be looking at ways towards reconciliation, and that includes the personal reconciliation, but corporate reconciliation in terms of the amalgamation of all of us. But also racial reconciliation within the city. One of the projects that I've been working on has been the Faneuil Hall Race and Reconciliation Project. Faneuil Hall is named after Peter Faneuil, who was a slave owner. The building is owned by the city of Boston. We feel that it is an opportunity, and in terms of changing the name of Faneuil Hall is an opportunity to have these deep and critical conversations about race, racial division along a spectrum of indices, so as to move towards racial reconciliation in the city. So if as a Christian, and I think just in terms of practicality, in terms of living within a community, a civic community, we should be thinking about reconciliation, because division just never helps and never works in the long run.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Kevin. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna move on to Ruth. Ruth is with Emmanuel Gospel Center, and fun fact, Ruth has known me since I was a little kid. I think she was also my youth counselor at that point in my life. So hopefully you won't be sharing any stories today, but Ruth, can you share about yourself and your organization and how COVID-19 has impacted your community?
Sure, thank you. Don't worry, Matt. I'm sure you have stories about me too, so we'll stay safe here. Yeah, so I am Ruth Wong. I am a program director at Emmanuel Gospel Center. As an organization, we are working with churches and Christian leaders to help them serve urban communities more effectively. I am a program director for the Boston Education Collaborative, so I focus a lot on urban education, and that's what I'll share mostly about today. But my colleagues in the other programs actually partner and connect with many of you, the speakers and the organizations represented today. So it's really great to be here with everybody. For the Boston Education Collaborative, we have been playing sort of the intermediary role as a bridge, as a connector, as a networker, that's really trying to connect the resources that churches and Christians across the city have, and then to come alongside the students and families. Most of the students and families would be part of urban public schools, especially Boston Public Schools, but also some of the faith-based educational programs that exist in the city. And so I kind of have a unique role of getting to see how families and students are doing, primarily from the district level of Boston Public Schools, seeing, the broad view, but also at the school level, because we had been working with churches to help build church-school partnerships. So some of the schools, we have, good and deep relationships with. And so since the pandemic hit, as you can imagine, so many of the families have been affected, really around their basic needs. And so I know Reunion was part of volunteer groups that went out and helped with food distribution at BPS schools. So food insecurity continues to be an issue for these families. One thing that emerged for me was around diapers. I'll actually maybe show some pictures right now. I forgot I was going to share my screen and talk through some of this. But yeah, so what happened was that I ended up learning about the diaper needs in Chelsea. And so ended up rallying some churches to help with that. But I also ended up finding out that, many families all over Greater Boston had needs for diapers. And so we were working with a Latino church in Weymouth, Pastor Johanna Perez and her husband. They are part of a large Latino pastors network called Copani. And through their network, they were doing food deliveries to families. They have currently like over 600 families on their food delivery list. I was able to add some Boston Public School families onto their list, but they have drivers going all over. And as I realized we had families with diaper needs, she's become my partner to help deliver diapers as well as food. And we built a relationship with one of the BPS parent liaisons who, her church is actually in East Boston, and they basically have a lot of families, especially undocumented families, that come to them for food and resources. And so we were able to connect donations from different churches and funds that we've collected through donations to, provide some of the diapers, and then also connected the resource of food from Kopani and another organization called Alpha, and be able to sort of bring the two together. And so they shared some pictures of these families coming. And, in talking to Elsa, my parent liaison friend, she shared that these families, yeah, they really do prefer to come to her church to pick up these resources rather than going to the school or to the food pantries. And because of our connections with school level people, so the food also went to English High School. There's a student success coordinator there, and she reached out to me and asked about food for 20 families, also I think all or mostly undocumented. And so she received the bags, and then she delivered the food to these families. And the last picture I'll share is this is from you all, from your union. And so as a neighbor of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church down the street in the South End, you guys adopted and took on 10 families that are part of their programs. But these are all BPS families. And last week, Pastor Matt and Pastor Chris went and delivered your donations of formula, diapers, and wipes to this program. And so, I think for me right now, um, a lot of the needs and the support has been focused on that, but I'll just cover a couple things other than the basic essentials. Um, so online learning is a challenge and has been a challenge for families. Parents with young children have difficulties sort of navigating this, especially if English is not their first language. But even students, I think I've talked to a young person that I've worked with in the past, and she's pretty motivated and a good learner type, but then she was telling me that it's been hard for her to engage. It's just not the same as being in person. And then I think with the undocumented families, they just have a lot of hurdles and a lot of challenges navigating the systems for resources. So those are ongoing challenges. And I guess in terms of how to partner, I'll just share a couple of things. I guess the common point about funds is just everywhere, unfortunately. So if you all were interested, there are a lot of funds out there for either money to support undocumented families, money for grocery gift cards, or just gift cards in general, because some families, or actually what I've been hearing now is families are having trouble paying their bills, like utility, cell phone bills. So gift cards can also help with that. I still have a diaper fund, so diaper funds are around. But if you wanted to donate items, we definitely can take, the diapers, food kind of donations. But if you're interested in being more in a active, like relational way of serving the community, my partners, since they are delivering food to hundreds of families across Greater Boston, they are interested in having a few more drivers. So if you are free on a Friday or Saturday morning, they usually do their deliveries Friday morning or Saturday morning. And if you are a language specific speaker, there are needs for Spanish-speaking volunteers that could help. My partner organization called Alpha, they've been reaching out to families around to get them involved in filling out the census, but also they, because they're giving funds out to undocumented families that can't qualify for the federal stimulus checks, they also could use volunteers to help with some of those conversations. And then lastly, I am concerned about learning loss with the students, and everyone is. I mean, Boston Public Schools is also very concerned, and they're trying to figure things out. But I think we are moving closer to being able to take volunteers and mentors and guest speakers to help teachers and to help students. And so if you were interested even in potentially becoming a mentor or tutor, it's in the works. So I could probably, help with that too.
Thanks so much, Ruth. I really appreciate it. I appreciate also that you called me Pastor Matt, which we might have to edit that out. But anyway, I'm going to move on to Mike. And Mike, you have a long history with Reunion, still part of our community, but now you are with Fostering Hope. I'd love for you to share about what you're up to and how COVID-19 has impacted the community that you partner and serve with.
Sure. Thanks, Matt, and thanks to everyone. Just really excited about the incredible work that's being done by the folks represented on the call. Glad to be part of it. I work for a small organization called Fostering Hope New England. I'm the director of programs there. I'm also a foster and adoptive dad. And at Fostering Hope, we help churches and individuals care for children and families impacted by foster care. Our generational vision is what we call Project Zero, which is just the dream of a day when 0 children impacted by foster care are waiting for a safe and supported family to care for them. Ideally, whenever possible, that family turns out to be the child's family of origin through family preservation and reunification. But in the meantime, there's an urgent need for more temporary foster families and permanent adoptive families. And so we work with churches to create in their communities what we call sustainable cultures of care and ministry to the foster care community, creating scalable plans with churches to develop tangible steps towards building culture as churches raise up foster and adoptive families, build small communities of support and encouragement around them, consider the environments that they're creating and how those environments are sensitive to and welcoming for children and families from hard places, and children from hard places and the families who care for them, and then helping those in the community who maybe aren't ready to take what seems like a significant step into foster care adoption, think about ways that they can still be part of the story of caring for and supporting families and children impacted by foster care. And so there's lots more that I could say about the work that we're doing, but the foster care community has been pretty deeply impacted by the COVID season, just like everyone represented on this call. One thing about the foster care community is that there are so many groups that are touched by the foster care system. And so I'll just talk about a few. The first being families of origin or birth families. And these are families who are still together, but DCF and other agencies are working to help stabilize and provide support for them. And unfortunately, these families are often some of the first families who are susceptible when the economy is rough. And so many of these families are experiencing a job loss or reduction in hours, or these families might be essential workers or at risk for contracting the virus. And so in a population that's already experiencing difficulty with issues like lower hourly wages and food scarcity and housing costs, this season has only increased the needs and anxieties and in some cases crises as these families work to understand and seek support through social resources and agencies. We're also working with a lot of undocumented families that it's been mentioned. Their status doesn't qualify them for some resources, or they're having difficulties accessing and navigating systems that are hard enough for folks who are originally part of this culture and whose these systems are kind of built for to understand and navigate. And so it's been difficult for some of those families to navigate healthcare, educational systems, some of those kinds of things, or simply because of fear to access some of those systems. We've been trying to help some families who are undocumented. Kinship families have been pretty dramatically impacted. And these are families or close relationships who are caring for children while birth families work towards stability and healing. There's been a number of families who've taken or welcomed children into their home, either formally through DCF or informally to avoid DCF involvement in this season. And so we've helped to support a grandmother who has taken in 4 of her grandchildren in this season while her daughter was unable to care for their children as working to become healthy. We had a family of 5 who welcomed 5 goddaughters into their home. So suddenly overnight went from 5 to 10 in their family. And there are a number of folks who in this season are being asked to welcome children into their home as kinship caregivers. DCF has been pretty dramatically impacted in this season. In offices where there's sometimes 100, 140, 160 workers. Now only about 3 to 5 workers are allowed in the office at any time. And so many workers are working from home who never have before. And social work has been a pretty interpersonal, face-to-face sector or culture. And so their systems and processes and structures really have been kind of turned on their heads in this season. And so a lot of their focus has been on emergency response, figuring out what it looks like to visit families without being able to enter homes, how to schedule visits with birth parents virtually. Courts have been closed, so it's difficult to move cases along. And then a lot of the process to recruit and welcome potential new families, a lot of those processes and systems have really been put on pause in this season. And so there are not a lot of new families who are kind of entering the system and stepping into a need that already existed and we think will only become more dramatic. And then foster families in this time are dealing with a lot of the challenges that many other families are dealing with, in balancing schooling and working from home, maybe loss of childcare. Not all, but certainly many children from hard places because of their trauma histories don't deal with changes in structure and routine or loss of critical relationships well, it can be triggering for them. And so many of these families are dealing with kind of challenging behaviors and emotions as they help their kiddos through all this uncertainty of the season. A lot of the families have lost therapeutic supports, especially early on in the season. Visits with birth families that were scheduled in person weekly are now expected to kind of happen online. So we have friends who are trying to get their 3-year-old to sit in a 30-minute Zoom call. And no matter how excited a 3-year-old is to talk with someone on the other end, getting them to stay focused for 30 minutes can be difficult or challenging. Court cases, as I mentioned, have been held up, and so families awaiting adoption have had their dates postponed. And then families have been asked to consider taking in children who've been exposed to COVID, or even quarantining with children who've tested positive. We have a friend who has actually cared for a number of children whose mothers have had to who've tested positive, had to enter the hospital and didn't have somewhere for their child to go during this time. And so there are families who are taking in children while their parents are recovering from COVID and can be reunited again. So lots of ways, certainly, that this community has been impacted. And those are just a few of the folks, representatives who are experiencing a lot of change in this season.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. And I think, I know we are a partner with you, Reunion is, and there are definitely ways that we want to partner with you. I know you started an initiative.
Sure. One of the things that we began in response to this COVID season is when the season began, we reached out to folks that we knew at DCF, organizations that were advocates for children and families in the foster care community, just to listen to what the needs were. And one of the things that we heard was that there are a number of families who are experiencing gaps in the social services that are available to families to help in this time of crisis. And so our intention is certainly not to circumvent those social systems and resources, nonprofits who are doing excellent work to support families, but really to step into gaps to provide some tangible support in moments of crisis for families, while workers come alongside families to develop plans towards sustainability. And so we've stepped in to provide diapers and formula and wipes and groceries, grocery gift cards, mattresses for families. We've had a number of things that we've done to support families. And so, as we said, we're going to be talking a little bit more about ways that people can be involved. We've created a forum where child welfare professionals and advocates can refer needs of families experiencing crisis to us, and that we can then mobilize local churches to respond to those needs, and in many cases deliver supplies or resources directly to families.
Thanks.
A couple other things, if it's all right, that I'll mention is, if you've ever thought about becoming a foster adoptive parent, this is a season where the need is only going to become greater. About 80% of referrals to DCF are made by mandated reporters or through close relatives or neighbors of families. And so in this season, while there aren't as many eyes on kids, there's been a dramatic decrease in the number of referrals. But as many of you have seen, there's an expected increase in the amount of domestic violence that's being experienced, substance abuse, et cetera. And so as things continue to reopen, as kids get back into school and daycare, workers get back into homes, we anticipate that the need for families to step in to provide temporary care through foster care is going to only increase. And so if you're interested in and have ever thought about becoming a foster adoptive family, we'd love to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you sharing, and I appreciate all the panelists sharing. I kind of want to open it up to questions now, if you have any for one another. I don't know if something that someone said sparked a question or even an encouragement, because I'm sure a lot of people are overlapping with the same issues, and unfortunately, some of the same broken systems are related to one another. So just want to open it up to see if there's any questions that you may have for one another.
This may be a question not to be answered necessarily right now, but one of the things that we're working on doing is really trying to figure out what are the needs that are really getting unmet right now? Like who's being overlooked? Like there's a lot happening, and there are a lot of people who are getting some great support, but I know that there are a lot of people who are slipping through those cracks. And hearing Ruth talk a lot, and Mike to some extent too, talking about undocumented folks, I'd be curious to sort of find out about needs that you know about that aren't getting met, for food specifically in my case, but just in general. So
That's a great
ways to connect to that need.
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a question. As you know, Boston's they're full of people who aren't really from this area. Like people come here for school, people come here for jobs. And many people don't fully understand the deep-rooted issues that exist in this city. For each one of you, I guess, within your areas, why do you think it's important for us to know that history to fully understand or help us understand what's currently going on in the Boston area? And I'll throw that out there for anyone to answer.
I feel like punting this over to Kevin because I know for education, something I learned because I did come out here for college, and I am a transplant, but I've been here for over, I don't know, I won't say how many years, but it's been a long time. So I do feel like I'm part of Boston, but I think with education, there is so much around race that is embedded in the history from the busing years, and that affects the relationship that parents have with the school system right now, the lack of trust, the frustration. So, but I think as I'm learning, there's just a lot that I had to learn and catch up on, and hearing the parents talk, and even now as we are still like I'm part of the district level equity roundtables that they host weekly, where they are trying to have the community advocates, parents, staff be the accountability and sounding board, for the school district. But the history still comes up in a lot of the conversations. But I'm kind of punting this over.
Well, no, Ruth, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the question is appropriate. I don't think we get to engage the real serious issues that COVID-19 has raised in terms of the various crises in our community without looking at history of oppression of women, class oppression, inter-ethnic oppression between the Irish and the Anglos, and then you have the issue of race, which goes back before the founding of the city. It is so critical for us to have the deep conversations, the deep dialogue about our history, which is a shared history. However tragic it may be at some points, there are highlights of the history. We shouldn't ignore the fact that we developed, or Boston contributed to the development of democracy and the idea of freedom. All that sort of stuff is wonderful, but there are some low moments that continue to plague us. And if we don't have a sense of the history, and if we don't engage the history with courage and real humanity, and a sense of spiritual discernment, then we miss the opportunity for real brotherhood and sisterhood, and moving towards what Dr. King used to call the beloved community. We can't achieve that here in Boston because we have the resources in terms of the plethora of faith-based organizations, in terms of churches, in terms of the number of advocacy organizations, and people who, whether they are faith-based or not, have good hearts and want to help. We won't move forward on any of these things if we don't engage the history in any kind of deep and substantive way, I believe.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate that. But I don't know if there's any words of hope and encouragement that anyone can share about, like, what are you hopeful about? Or what are some stories maybe that you can share that our community can be encouraged about in your sector or your area?
I think for us at Pine Street Inn, um, you know, homeless population is society's most vulnerable. And the city, alongside Pine Street Inn and the other nonprofits, have really led the way and not forgetting about these people. And the pandemic itself, is just driving our mission further. Understanding that this is really a solution. We've always thought it was. At our foundation, we've always cared for people and fed them and given them a place to sleep. But we're trying to empower them to do it themselves. So there's a lot in the history of how we need housing in this market in Boston. Is pretty hard to come by. But I think the collaboration of all of the corporations, all of the faith-based groups that have come alongside us over the years, and how they have responded well for our organization, gives us hope that things look well for the people that we serve.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
I was gonna, oh, go ahead.
No, please, you go ahead.
Okay, I was going to share a couple things. So one is that I guess, unfortunately, it sort of took this pandemic for some of our churches to finally meet each other, connect with each other, work with each other. So I don't have time to share all the testimonials, but basically suburban churches, white churches are connecting with urban churches and coming alongside, with resources and people. But we're getting to see the body of Christ sort of represented in so many different ways, kind of coming together and working. And the bridges that, needed to happen have been happening, so that's one example. And the other thing I would just say around education is, as much as we hate all the Zoom meetings that we've been having, but because of the pandemic and having to do everything by Zoom, the school district, at least with Boston Public Schools and Dr. Casilius, the superintendent, she's formed these equity roundtables at the district level, but also at every school. So like the Blackstone School has an equity roundtable that you guys could potentially attend. And so I think that it created this new opportunity for more people to participate and for voices to be heard, that helps the school district really consider all the needs, all the perspectives as they make decisions that are going to affect families and students. So I feel that even in this new initiative, it's going to stay. I think that this equity roundtable, kind of initiative is going to stay, and it's going to provide a platform for more community voice. So that's a good thing.
Ruth. Danielle?
Can you just say again, the equity roundtables are organized by the school districts, or?
They're at all levels. So there's one for the school district, and I can definitely share info with you all if you're interested. And then at schools, that was sort of what Dr. Casilius asked all of her principals and headmasters to do, is to have school-based equity roundtables, and the community is invited to attend any of these.
I would say in the foster care community, there has been a lot of work to, there is a history where the church at one point has said we want to be part of the solution in caring for children in need of families and homes, and then began the work and then kind of faded and disappeared. And so there's some relational history to recover from when it comes to churches and faith communities being involved in this story. And I think this season has been a season where the church has been consistent and has shown up, has asked how they can help, and then has stepped in to meet needs and to respond in some pretty significant ways. And so it's a season where I think and I hope that the church and faith communities are beginning to once again establish a reputation as a trusted and important partner in this story of caring for vulnerable children. And we know that it's going to take intentionality, and there's a long ways to go, and that it's a fragile relationship, but it's been really just beautiful to see churches from a lot of different places and a lot of different backgrounds and stories come together to support this community. And so excited, not just for the work that churches are doing, but for incredible partners like those on this call who are coming around vulnerable children and families in our city.
Thanks, Mike. All right, well, I'm gonna wrap things up here. I know we went a little bit longer than we thought, so I appreciate everyone's patience with that. Thank you so much, each and every one of you, for being on this call. We will try to kind of, in our description with the video, we'll try to get all that, your websites on there and ways that they wanna volunteer or help out. And I'll be in contact with you about some further information that you can kind of send me, so then we can make sure we communicate that with the rest of our community. So thank you again. I appreciate all of you. You guys are all the best. And for the people that I just met, I hope to see you around more so. And for the people I've seen, I hope to see you again. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night. And hopefully we will see you soon, and that we will be partnering even more closely in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks everyone.